Hey guys, it's Megan Aller here in sales, sales executive with First American Title in Denver, Colorado for your weekly video update. This week I wanted to give you a little bit of information about what our luxury market looks like. When I initially put this presentation together, I threw out a social media post that asked people, so if I could tell you anything about the luxury market, what would you want to know? And honestly, the first thing that came up was, well, what does the luxury price point start at? And so this covers the 7 Metro Denver counties. I've listed those out for you here in case you wanted to know the geography that I'm talking about, but we need to talk about the evolution of our market over the last 10 years before we can talk about what happens with our luxury market. And so when we're reviewing our sales prices by range over the last 10-year cycle, we know that we've entered into this extreme seller's market back in 2012, and what's happened over time is that it's really pulled up our entire average sales price point. In this graph behind me, we're looking at the dark blue bar, and that represents homes that were between $0 and $200,000. Back in 2008, that represented almost 50% of our market. Now, if we're looking at just 2018, that's less than 5% of our overall market. I would say that easily the bulk of our market right now is for homes that are between $200,000 and $600,000. That represents about 77% of our overall market are those homes between $200,000 and $600,000. So where does the luxury price point start at? Because by nature, it's an exclusive price point for people to be working in. Now, that exclusive price point has shifted at the same rate as those over the last 10-year period that we've looked at just in that past graph. So typically when I get questions about what's happening in the luxury price point, people want to know, well, how much has my luxury home appreciated? Okay, and so when we're looking at luxury, there's several different definitions that we're looking at out there. Now, the appreciation analysis that I'm showing behind me, the green bar represents our baseline, and that's all price points here in Metro Denver. Now, starting back in 2008, average sales price of a home was sitting around $238,000 versus now we're looking at closer to a $500,000 average price point. So if we wanted to track the top 10% of our market, the top 10% of our market now looking at 2018 means that those are homes that are over $750,000. But 10 years ago, the top 10% of our market was $450,000. So rather than tracking appreciation rates by price ranges, we track them in percentages of markets. So if I were to tell you how much has the top 10% of our market appreciated, it's not at the same rate as the overall market, going up roughly 10% year over year. In the last 10 years, it's gone up 9% on average each year for the last 10 years, or 90% in that 10-year period. But when we look at the top 10% of our market, it's gone up about 63% in that same 10-year period. So the top 10% of our market has appreciated roughly 6% on average in the extreme sellers market that we're working with. Now, if we're looking at the top 1% of our market, that's that gold line that runs across the top of the page. Back in 2008, as we were starting to take the dive into the recession, that started at homes that were about $1.15 million. Okay, so about $1,150,000. Okay, now it dipped a little bit as we went through the recession, but now if we're looking at that top 1% in our market, we're sitting at about $1,550,000 or up from that market. So that means the top 1% of our market has appreciated 40% in the last 10-year period, so it's averaged closer to a 4% appreciation rate. So for those of you that live in that over $1 million price point, our market has grown significantly for the last 10 years since 2008. So as we slid into that recession back in 2009, 10, and 11, back to 2008, the number of units that have closed that are over $1 million, or between 1 million to 1.25, that's increased by 182%. So the size of our market for that over $1 million market has increased greatly. For those units that are between 2.5 million and 3 million, the quantity of those transactions has increased 132%. Okay. Now, looking at the month's supply of inventory, when we're talking about is this market a good market to sell or buy luxury properties in, I think that perspective will carry you a long way. Now, when I first started trending these numbers back in 2007 through 2010, if we're looking at that $2.5 million to $3 million price range, which is really at the very tippy top of our marketplace. Looking back at 2010 and 2011, the way that we read that number is that we had over 100 months of inventory at that point. So that meant that if no new properties came to market, how many units that we had on the market at that point, it would have taken over 100 months to sell those. That also means that for every one buyer that was looking at homes that were over $1 million or over $2 million, that they had over 100 choices available in the market. Now, if you fast forward to 2018, we're sitting a lot closer to about 15 months worth of inventory. Okay, so we can't measure it with the same metrics that we do for those homes that are between $200,000 and $600,000. This is a much more exclusive market. When we look at that $1 to $1.2 million market, we've been hovering around 5 months worth of inventory versus where we were back in 2010 or 2011, where we had roughly a 2-year supply. So the market's moving a lot more swiftly right now. Close to list price ratios, you can see that over time at the bottom of the recession, that it wasn't uncommon for people to give discounts on those prices. From contract to closing, people were negotiating down 10% on average oftentimes, versus now we're looking at closer to between 4 to 6% of a price reduction in our marketplace. Okay, days on market have also dropped down. It's taking significantly less time than what we saw back at the top of the recession. Average days on market have hovered for all of those price ranges that we're tracking here between $1 million to $3 million in this particular analysis, somewhere between 60 to 90 or 120 days if you get into that $2.5 to $3 million price range. Now, I've also put together a quick little cheat sheet for you about when to list if you're looking for that maximum opportunity. And this represents homes that are between 1 to 2 million, and then I have another one for 2 to 3 million, okay? The green area, when we start to stack all of the metrics on top of each other for when the best time to track your closing is, corresponds with the dates that are on the left-hand side of this calendar. So it lines up fairly closely with where the rest of the market is, but it actually ends up being just a little bit later in the year. So the optimal times for the $1 to $2 million mark is that you want to be in the market between March and May for the largest pool of potential buyers. Now, they have less interest rate sensitivity in higher price points because there are fewer home purchases that require on financing in order to get into those homes. We've been averaging somewhere between 25 to 30% of those homes purchased between 1 and 2 million have been cash transactions in Metro Denver. So a little bit less sensitivity to interest rate. When we're looking at that $200,000 to $600,000 price point, it ends up being about 88% of all of those folks need financing to get into a home. When we look at the $2 to $3 million mark, it's more volatile because there are fewer transactions that happen during that point, but it ends up being, again, somewhere listing between April and June is your target time for those homes that are between 2 and 3 million. There's even less interest rate sensitivity as you go up into the $2 to $3 million mark. It ended up being somewhere between 35 to 45% of those homes in the last 4 years were purchased using cash transactions. I hope that this helps give you a good guideline when you're comparing the difference between luxury versus traditional transactions. If you'd like to get a copy of this report, shoot me an email. My information's at the bottom of the screen. Again, my job is to make sure that you have all of the information to better advise your buyers and sellers. I hope that if we're able to help you better advise your buyers and sellers, that we'll get to meet them at our closing tables. Thanks so much.